Apologies for interrupting. Right, sorry, Thierry, back to you.
Yeah. What we realized was that as part of when we published the initial version of the drafts, based on the feedback that we got from ISPs, was that there's several use cases where mobile ISPs have private domain names and they want only the subscriber to access these services. Either it could be to pay bills, or it could be access specific content providers that could be accessed because you're a subscriber. And with that change, what was discussed was, let's make this more generic, that split horizon DNS configuration is not just specific to enterprise, but is applicable to other types of networks. And then we started updating the draft to because there is no prior pre-configuration, unlike if you do it in, let's say, VPN, where you have IETF and the client authenticates to the server, and there's a prior existing relationship where the VPN server provides the private domains and the domains with different view because you are attached to the network. We were looking for ways for the best way to provide those domain names that the network is claiming to have authority over. And we wanted to make sure that the network is not lying, right? I mean, if the network doesn't own Gmail, we don't want the network to say Gmail and the client blindly trust that. So how do you do that, right? Those are the two main challenges that we had in front of us. So to solve the first problem, what we realized was, hey, IETF has already standardized provisioning domains. Provisioning domains has been used for quite some time at IETF for providing additional information that the network could provide to the endpoints when they're attached to a network. So it's basically the RA option would give an FQDN to which an HTTPS connection is established, and that would actually give you additional information. It could be prefixes or any other local network specific information. So that provisioning domain concept was enhanced to add a new identifier called DNS zones, which would basically carry all these domains for which the network claims authority. That solved one piece of the problem, that now the client knows that these are the domains for which the network claims authority. This is especially useful in today's world where endpoints may be configured to use public resolvers for various purposes. For example, you're using OpenDNS because you believe OpenDNS gives you filters malware and you want to use that in all the networks, but you still want to, you connect to a network and you still want to use the local resolver to resolve some of the private domains, or you want to do split DNS to get the actual responses because you're attached to the network. How do you get that working, right? So in those cases, this draft especially addresses that problem, that the endpoint would learn what those private domain names are and what those domain names are for which the network claims authority and is giving different responses just because you're attached to the network. So for those cases, the next challenge was to address how does the client verify that the network is not lying. So for that reason, what we did was basically, if Andrew can move to section 4.1, it basically talks about a mechanism where the client has to probe the network. Basically, it has already an existing relationship where it's talking to a public resolver, basically reaches to the public resolver, does an NS lookup to find out what the name servers are, and gets those name servers. It basically checks if those name servers matches the network designated encrypted resolvers that the network is publishing. And if there is a match, it means that the network is indeed authoritative of those domains. And then it basically establishes, very similar to what's happening with other drafts in ad working group. It establishes a secure connection, validates a TLS certificate, and then basically queries those domains using the network designated resolver. But for rest of the queries, since it's already configured to use a public resolver, it still continues to do that. So that this is bringing in a way to validate that if the user by mistake connects to a rogue network, for example, the user may be assuming he's connecting a hotel network, but he connects to an attack network, and the attacker claims ownership of any of the popular domains and wants to do DNS spoofing or monitoring or any of the stuff, that could be avoided because of this proof of ownership that the client has to have a connectivity to a public resolver, and it does basically do an NS query and checks if the NSR set matches the ADN of the discovered network resolver. So that helped us basically to get over the security problem, which was stopping us to take this draft forward. And after this got revised and we had discussions in the working group in the last 2 to 3 IETF sessions, based on the traction, this draft has been called for working group adoption, and we are looking for more comments on this draft from the working groups, whether this would work in the deployments that you are aware of, whether you see any challenges in the way the mechanisms have been proposed in this draft, whether that would work in your enterprise specific deployment or ISP deployment or any other deployment. And
but in
we
the
are
meantime, if we can, it's going to take the day or so to get to the lab.
Hello.
Yeah, carry on, Tira. I think just some background noise.
Okay. Yeah, so any feedback on this draft would be great, and posting those comments on the working group and responding whether you support this draft or you want more updates to the draft would be great to progress this work.
Brilliant. Thanks, Tiro. So you'll see I've put the URL to the draft in the chat, and those of you looking at your screen will also see some of the text on the screen currently, which I will now just remove, and really just give an opportunity. I don't know if anyone's had a chance over the last few weeks to give any thought to the draft, or has any immediate comments that you might want to share with Tiru and colleagues in terms of the applicability, if I can say it properly, of the draft in your sort of various areas. So if you do, I'll just pause and see if anyone wants to sort of come in with any comments or indeed questions before we move on to the other paper.
I just had a quick comment. This is Vinny.
Hi, Vinny, go ahead.
Yeah, so I think this is a really important draft, particularly in enterprise VPN use cases. One of the key features in modern enterprise VPNs is moving away from IP-based split tunneling to domain-based split tunneling. And in order for that to continue to work in an encrypted DNS ecosystem, the client on the endpoint would have to be able to still see the DNS traffic in order to decide whether the traffic needs to be tunneled or not. And I'm just wondering, Tiru, if you thought a little more about that use case, because you have to see both what you don't want to tunnel and what you do want to tunnel, because you have to enforce the things going out on this sort of split horizon aren't going out that shouldn't be going out, like an enterprise directed DNS request shouldn't be going out the public interface, as an example. So I was just curious if you thought about that. I know Tiru, you and I have talked about this a little bit.
Yeah, right, Vinny. So this I think the update to this draft definitely addresses that, because now the DNS zones is validated by the client before any queries happen. So what would happen is, in case where most of all the queries would hit the enterprise VPN, because the enterprise VPN server is enforcing some sort of DNS filtering to enforce enterprise policies or blocking malware and other kind of stuff. So because the DNS zones would have already provided the list of the domains that the client would access, a prior check would validate whether these domains can be visited by the user or not, and then because they're all part of the JSON file that's being downloaded as part of the PVD, the client can make a choice whether these zones are safe to access or not.
Does that help, Vinny?
Yeah, I think, the only concern, a little bit of a concern is you're relying on the protocol to apply those enforcements, right? So preventing like leakage on a public DNS interface of corporate DNS requests. It's something I think we just got to think about a little bit. The way we do it today, because DNS is in the clear on the public interfaces, we introspect on the endpoint to look for that DNS leakage and prevent it from happening. we're going to put a lot of reliance now in the protocol and the implementations of the protocol by various OS vendors to do the right thing there. So I think, time will tell if that's sufficient to ensure proper security. But I'm a big proponent of this draft. I think it's very positive direction. So thank you for doing this, Tiru.
Yeah, thanks, Vinny. Thanks for all the review comments.
Thanks. Anyone else with any questions or comments on this draft? Doesn't look like it at the moment. Well, as I say, you've got the URL for the draft in the chat. So if you haven't had a chance to look at it and do have the time, I think any comments to the ADD mailing list over the next roughly next week, because it was last Tuesday when the call for option was posted. So I think there's another week to post any thoughts as to whether it should be adopted by the working group. So please have a look and please post your comments if you have the time and inclination to do so. Okay, so that then brings us on to the second of the two drafts, which again, I'll just pop the first page on the screen in case you've not had a chance to look at it yet, which is the deployment considerations draft, which I personally thought was pretty uncontroversial, but there have been quite a few comments thus far on the mailing list. Again, Tiru, is anything that you might want to comment?
Yeah, most of the comments I saw, I mean, this draft actually, if you look at most of the content of this draft was part of the DNR draft, where it was talking about when we were writing the draft, we wanted to see how that protocol would, the DNR mechanism of using DHCP or RWAIT to advertise the ADN of the encrypted resolver, whether that would work in various deployments, whether DDR would work in certain deployments. So we were like looking at various such deployments, and we were trying to put all those deployment and cross-checking whether the protocol is meeting those deployment considerations or not. But then there was a huge discussion in the working group that we don't have to keep all these deployment considerations within the protocol draft, and let's keep it separate. So all that was moved from that draft to this informational draft, which is basically talking about what does it mean to deploy encrypted DNS forwarders or resolvers either within your home network, your enterprise network, or your ISP? What kind of challenges you would be facing, and what happens if you have, let's say, legacy CPEs where you can update the configuration? For what happens if you have legacy CPEs where you can't even update the configuration? Then what happens? Why? And what would the endpoint do in those kind of cases? Whether DDR would help or DNR would help to solve those deployment considerations. So this draft basically talks about various deployment models with regard to cellular, home networks with managed CPE, unmanaged CPE, legacy CPE. And one of the work that I did when I was back at McAfee was McAfee had a security agent which is running on home routers where we enforce filtering basically to filter malware, parental control, IoT security, MUD rules basically to enforce what type of domains that an IoT device would visit. And for us, it's very important that we wanted to make sure the endpoints continue to discover and use local forwarders so that we can enforce policies at an IP level basically, because we typically have a policy of blocking certain endpoints because we see it's infected with malware, but that's not possible if you enforce the filtering at the ISP layer. So for that, what we had done was we've been working with OpenExchange to host a DOS DOT forwarder on the home router, and we've been talking to Let's Encrypt to provision the home router. ISPs would basically provision the home router with subdomains, and then we talk to Let's Encrypt, and Let's Encrypt would give us a certificate. So that means the endpoints can now talk to the DOS DOT forwarder just like it's talking to a public resolver, but it's actually private, that only the endpoints connected to the home network would continue to use the home router. And then it basically solves two problems that we could enforce: security-based filtering, per device-based filtering. And the best part was it doesn't overload the ISP's resolver with too many connections now, because the caching on the forwarder is kicking in just like what it was happening with clear text DNS. And that's all what we captured based on our implementation, what we saw. the challenges that we faced, and we captured all of that in the deployment considerations, and that was discussed in the working group. But now I'm seeing like this quite comments that we don't have to even adapt this draft and progress on it. I don't care whether it becomes an RFC, but I think it's a good document where everybody can share their deployments and the challenges that they are facing to adapt ad protocols, and how they are adapting these ad protocols, and how they are deploying encrypted DNS forwarders or encrypted resolvers, and any best practices that we need to follow to get this done. And I thought this is more for implementers to know if they're deploying or trying to migrate from clear text DNS to encrypted DNS. So this is only for that purpose, and I don't care if it becomes an individual RFC or it just stays as an individual submission. But I felt it would be useful for anyone who is interested in deploying encrypted DNS resolvers.
Yeah. Well, again, thanks for the sort of quick run through, Tiru. I don't know if anyone has any questions, comments, or other observations. If you had a chance to look at this document yet. Just while people are thinking, I think there was one comment in the on the ADD mailing list, which was, or there were several comments saying that they didn't think this is something that the working group should publish. But then I think one of the exchanges pointed out that just because the working group adopts a document, it doesn't then have to go forward and publish this as an RFC. It can just be a useful repository to sort of help share knowledge. I don't think either of the chairs have commented on that yet, but that might remove some objections to the document if there's agreement that it doesn't necessarily need to be sort of published as an RFC. Again, I'll just see if anyone else wants to come in with any sort of observations or comments. I for one certainly think it is a useful document, and it is helpful to have this sort of captured somewhere to say so what the key deployment considerations are. But there may be alternate points of view on this. Well, there clearly are, judging by some of the comments on the mailing list. Doesn't look like anyone has anything else specific on this one. And interestingly, it looks like my Zoom controls have frozen, which is a bit awkward because I can't remove the share screen. That's going to wake up in a moment, but it's just a problem with my connection. Because it could be a bit tedious looking at the page of the document for any extended period of time. But I don't think anyone wants to come in on this, or if you do, you just have to unmute and speak, because it may be that my sort of Zoom screen isn't telling me if anyone's got a hand raised. I'll take silence as probably not. In which case, I think that's incredibly helpful, sort of Tiru, to have persevered with the challenging weather situation, and also the time zone difference, and being able to sort of join the call to talk about that. Hopefully, that will get a few more people to comment on the mailing list, obviously positively or negatively, to ensure there's a sort of reasonable balance of views from across the working group. on whether either or both documents should be adopted. But it'd be interesting to see what other comments you get on the mailing list over the next week or so. I've said also, well, although it's frozen now, my sort of, whilst the auto transcript was working on my screen, I think at one point I did see Dean of Students rather than DNS inspection, which I thought was quite an interesting translation. And another point, I think I saw Jewish God on there, which I'm sure you didn't say. It'd be fascinating to know what it thought that was. So the Zoom auto transcription doesn't quite get all the tech stuff right, but it is nevertheless quite impressive. Right, anyway, whilst I try and see if I can get rid of the screen share, thank you for covering that, Tiru. Let's move on. And I just while I'm sort of grappling with my sort of technical problem, Roy, I don't know if you wanted to jump in and just sort of pose your OCSP question whilst I try and get rid of this screen share. You don't have to, but you're welcome to. Now would be quite a good opportunity whilst I try and make this work properly again.
Okay, good luck.
Thanks.
The question came up about OCSP stapling, and when I look at the draft RFC, it comments that if checking certificate revocation requires a DNS lookup, then that can lead to deadlock in establishing the DOE connection, and therefore OCS stapling should be used. That kind of sounds like a must be used, since deadlock sounds bad to me. But if you look at that's the draft DOE RFC. If you look at RFC 8484, it's much more nebulous, and I'm afraid I'm not the expert on TLS to understand all the implications of the new operational consideration section. So I was just wondering, does anybody have any real information on what DOE clients are actually doing and what you have to do? The current RFC talks about having to worry about authority information access deadlocks, and I guess I'd love to worry about that, but I'm not sure how to.
So does is there anything which anyone on the call is familiar with and is able to sort of give a view to Roy on their interpretation? And if you do, feel free to unmute and comment. If not, there's a couple of people who sort of will speak to offline that probably do have an opinion on this, but I just thought, also I was trying to get rid of the screen share. It was an opportune moment to see if anyone had an opinion on this.
Deadlock has always been something, strongly to be avoided. So it sounds like this ought to be important.
Looks like you've maybe stumped people, Roy. So maybe.
Yeah,
maybe...
I mean, I'm not a TLS expert in no shape or form. I know DNS pretty well, but I also know that there are other naming systems with, in addition to DNS. So maybe this has a relationship, but if DNS doesn't work, or if your naming doesn't work, you're pretty much dead anyway, right?
I would concur that OCSP stapling should really be listed as a must. We've implemented that in the Cisco resolvers. The solution wouldn't work without that, so I concur with that earlier comment that that language should probably say must.
Although I do know that some of the client software, clearly not Cisco software, Vinny, some of the companies are not keen on OCSP stapling. From memory, I think Mozilla certainly is not a fan of OCSP stapling, possibly because it has performance implications for browsers, but I'll
Yeah,
happy.
there's a serious chicken and egg problem, right? Because to do normal certificate revocation lists, you would have to do a DNS resolution to reach that server. And of course, if you're relying on encrypted DNS to do your resolution, then how can you verify the server at that point, right? It's like it's a definite chicken egg problem. And it was a lot of work for us to do this in our core resolvers. Not our DO dedicated resolvers, but our core resolvers. But we understood the issue there, that you really would end up in a deadlock if you weren't doing OCSP stapling. So I'm not sure what the Mozilla objection is, but I don't see a proposal of how they would work around that problem. It would probably be worth having them explain their alternative. Maybe that's something we could do.
Yeah, and I should say at this point, if I'm misrepresenting the Mozilla position, I apologize in advance, but I will check this out offline in that case, Roy, and see if get you some more input on that.
Thanks.
Okay, all right, well, thank you for that. Hopefully you don't now have the sort of about the third page of the internet draft in front of you. So at least, hopefully I've got to that from the screen share. But we're very much on any other business now, as you may have gathered. There's not a huge amount happening in the press this week. I should say there was I thought, a very interesting conference last week, the Chatham House Cybersecurity Conference. So any of you that have an interest in cybersecurity, I put a link in the sort of weekly email to that. It's, in my opinion, that's well worth a look if you have the opportunity, just to signpost that one. And of course, we are very much in conference season now, only a few weeks away from IETF 112. And I think the final agenda landed last Friday. So hopefully now the working groups will start to publish the agendas for their respective sessions. So we should see that sort of flesh out a bit, hopefully in the next week or so. It does look like there's quite a few interesting sessions in the offing, hopefully. Plus, I think there's a couple of BOFs scheduled as well. So if you've not had a chance to look at that and are attending IETF 112, then sort of definitely worth a look to see what's coming up. Apart from that, though, I didn't have anything else this week. So anything else that anyone else wants to raise?
Just a question. I mean, we did or you did, to be precise, did a very nice introduction on what's happening on IETF for the last IETF, the week before the IETF actually happened. Any chance of that you're doing that again?
If it was useful, Ralph, I'm very happy.
It was absolutely useful.
Yeah, fine. Happy to do that. To be fair, it's something I have to do myself anyway, just to identify what sessions I'm going to attend. So I'm quite happy to put out a couple of slides and share it if other people found that useful. So yeah, I'll do that the week before IETF.
Absolutely. Thanks a lot.
Soon. Yeah, I'll make it out of that. Happy to do that, Ralph. And we'll, of course, do a session afterwards, just going through some of the highlights for anyone that wasn't able to attend, to signpost which recordings are worth paying particular attention to. And of course, this time around, for those of us in Europe, it's at a bit more of a civilized time of day as well, which is also a good thing. Yeah, duly noted. Anything else from anyone else? Doesn't look like it this week. In which case, I think we're done slightly earlier than usual. So please take the opportunity to look at those two internet drafts, post your comments to the ADD working group mailing list if you can in the next 7 days. And other than that, this time next week, all being well, Peter Lowe may well be giving us a presentation on the many unexpected uses of DNS, which he sort of talked about very briefly last week. So if you want to find out how to get the intro text from the original Star Trek episodes via DNS, amongst many other really obscure uses of DNS, then all being well, Peter will be taking us through that next week. And no doubt there'll be some other stuff as well, but I suspect it'll be hard to compete with Star Trek via DNS. So have a fantastic week, everyone, and see you same time next week. So thanks everyone for coming on. Bye all.